Coming back to the insulin piece here, there's a whole psychological aspect to it as well. You talk about in the book where just thinking about carbs causes the body to release a small bit of insulin. So we have that working against us as well.
Well, so this was, part of the advantage of being a journalist when you do this kind of research is you're not trapped in any particular discipline. So, if you can interview anyone you want. So, for my first book, Good Calories, Bad Calories, I interviewed around 600 researchers. I still can't believe that number, by the way, but at some point I actually stopped and counted. Um, so it turns out there's a field of science called physiological psychology that studies. They were interested in hunger. So the idea is underlying physiological states, like what your body is doing determines your fundamental behaviors like thirst or hunger, whether you eat, whether you drink, whether you go to the bathroom. It's all determined by what's happening inside your body. And there are researchers studying fat metabolism and endocrinology, people studying the hormonal regulation of fat. And it turns out when you read that literature, and it all goes back to Pavlov and Pavlov's dogs and a guy named Flood. It's an old, well-established science that kind of vanished in the 1990s with the molecular biology revolution. But it turns out that your body, one way to think about it, at any one time, if you're healthy, you don't have diabetes, when you wake up in the morning, you have about a teaspoon worth of carbohydrate in your bloodstream, blood glucose, literally 1 teaspoon. And if you're diabetic, you have a teaspoon and a half. I mean, it's crazy how small the numbers are. So you sit down for breakfast and you have like 500 calories, well, say 300 calories of cereal, and then you put some skim milk on it, and there's carbs and the lactose in the skim milk, and then you have a grapefruit, and there's some carbs there, maybe a glass of orange juice. So by the time you're done, you've had the equivalent of maybe, I don't know, 120 teaspoons of carbs that your body has to deal with. Remember, if the difference between a teaspoon and a teaspoon and a half is diabetes. So the way it does that is as the carbs get into your bloodstream, it secretes insulin to tell your lean tissue to burn those carbs for fuel. Just ferociously start burning that stuff because we don't want it to elevate too high because that's toxic. And because it takes insulin time to start working, your body needs to be prepared for this flood of carbs that's coming. So there's something called a cephalic phase secretion. Cephalic means above the neck. So you start thinking about eating. And this is, remember I said this field goes back to Pavlov. Pavlov showed that when he showed dogs like dinner, they would salivate. That's a Pavlovian response. So you start thinking about eating the cereal, you start to salivate, but you also your brain signals your pancreas to release insulin. So there's insulin in the bloodstream already when those carbs hit. Okay, it's a very well-designed system to keep your blood sugar low. And so it also works, the insulin tells your lean tissue, your cells, to start lowering the blood sugar already, and starts telling the fat tissue to store fat. So you actually start getting hungry because it starts taking the fuel out of the circulation where you need it to fuel the cells. And this is also why an appetizer, the idea of an appetizer is usually a sort of carb-rich food that makes you hungry for the meal. So just the process of secreting this insulin before you eat works to deal with the carbs after you eat, after you start eating, but it also works to make you hungry. And if you think about eating, you'll start secreting, especially carb-rich meals, you'll start thinking about secreting insulin, which will make you hungry. And part of the reason, I don't know if the Madison Avenue is aware of this, but by showing commercials with delicious pizza or people enjoying a Coca-Cola, or, the pause that refreshes, or a delicious burger, they're getting your brain to stimulate insulin, which will make you hungry. And in the 1980s, there are actually very, very well-respected researchers theorizing that obese individuals had more of this cephalic phase insulin secretion, which they should, and that would make them hungrier when confronted with the same meal. So the example I use in the book is, imagine you're walking through an airport. Imagine walking through an airport at all anymore. But remember, you're walking through an airport and there's a Cinnabon in the airport, a Cinnabon store, and somehow you can always smell the Cinnabon like 200 feet away, which I'm sure they do on purpose, right? Because you smell it and you want to eat the cinnamon bun. That smell, if you're lean and you're what's called insulin sensitive, you're healthy, that smell you won't have much of an insulin response. So a lean person and an obese person are both walking by the cinnamon bun store. The lean person smells the cinnamon bun, hot, tasty, and says, I'm not hungry, and walks by. The obese person has a cephalic phase insulin response, and that raises insulin, and his fat tissue is very sensitive to insulin. So his fat tissue just sucks up all the fat in his bloodstream, and suddenly he's hungry. There's a whole theory, basically, about how your liver is the sense organ of fuel availability. And so now, just by smelling the cinnamon bun, the person who suffers from obesity is hungrier than the lean person. So now he's going to want to go in and eat the cinnamon bun because of this hormonal phenomenon, purely hormonal phenomenon. And if he does, everyone will look at him and say, oh, no wonder why he's fat, right? He's got no willpower. Whereas it's got nothing to do with willpower. It's got something, it's about the sort of sensation of obesity, of hunger, the subjective sensation of hunger that he feels, and his lean friend does not.
And then he eats the cinnamon bun, continues to potentially be obese. Next time he passes by the cinnamon place, gets pulled right back in. So you can see how the cycle continues.
Same thing happens. And the joke, of course, is that the lean friend goes in and eats a cinnamon bun with him. Nobody judges him, right? Because he's lean. So they both eat a cinnamon bun, and people look at the person with obesity and think he got fat because he ate the cinnamon bun, and the lean person gets a free ticket. Roxane Gay has a line about this in her remarkable memoir, Hunger, where she says she's getting on an airplane with a friend. Roxane, the book is about dealing with this morbid obesity problem. Roxane Gay weighed well over 300 pounds. And she's getting on a plane with a friend, and the friend says, do you want to get a snack before we get on the plane? The friend says, no, people like me can't eat in public because if we do, we'll be judged. So it's sort of one of my issues. I tend to get angry about this because there's obesity, the burden of obesity physically is great. The burden psychologically is great, socially is great. There was a study done about 10 years ago, published in JAMA, that said children with obesity have lower satisfaction with life than children with cancer, which I find hard to believe, but that's what they reported. And then the implication is it's their fault. And they're constantly judged for it. And I would have been clinically obese by now. You don't get the right information. And the correct research is barely being done. When the research is done, it's misinterpreted to fit this belief that obesity is caused by eating too much.